All right. Well, welcome everybody to another installment of Drop the Mic Mondays with your host, Shauna Foster and Natasha Erskine, co-directors for About Face Veterans Against the War. We have a special episode for you today, but if you're tuning in for the first time, we broadcast this live on Monday, 2 p.m. Eastern every week. And Natasha and I, as co-directors of About Face, get to hear a lot about the anti-war movement and what's going on. And we want to share that with you because there's a lot of powerful work. We've interviewed Brown's Cost of War Project, Ramon Mejia with Grassroots Global Justice, and we've got another special guest for you today. So make your Mondays a whole lot better and a lot less militant by joining us today. We are so glad that you can be with us for Drop the Mic Mondays.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Good to be on with you again, Shauna. Hey, everyone. Listen, technology happens. Having some tech difficulties. I hope that as a minimum, that I am present here with you and can hear my voice despite my video challenges today. I'm ready to get into a great conversation. Listen, Shauna, when we talked about this show and why it was so important to spend the time, to communicate with our community and to talk about all of the isms, right, and the intersectionality of them and where we find ourselves in this current moment. And while we're hearing from the community that this is a time that we can have some righteous conversations with comrades who are doing great work and really want to be able to share that. So if you're watching this live, please go ahead and share this link with friends, families, your network, and invite them to join us in a discourse. We have a chat feature where if you're, on with us on YouTube or Facebook, drop a comment in the chat, engage with us, let us know you're here. If you have questions, we'll be able to get to that before, time permitting before we end today. So let's get into it, Shauna.
Yeah, today we have our special guest, Erins Hughes. Erins Hughes is a longtime organizer with Iraq Veterans Against the War and has now moved on to it hasn't really moved on. You've never left the anti-war movement, right, Erin? I feel like you've moved on from me, but you have moved on to greater, bigger and better things in Chicago and doing lots of great stuff that I can't wait to get to talking to you about. And Natasha, are you ready for the first question for our illustrious guest?
Well, first, I just want to reflect just a minute because listen, Erin was the first person of the Iraq Veterans Against War About Face organization years ago. Erin, I think that was 2016, 2017 over at the SEIU Union Hall. I think you were doing an art build for the Poor People's Campaign. I can't remember, but it's been a minute. And so it is really good to have you on with us. I want to read just a little bit about who you are, just to introduce you to the community who might not, already be aware. Erin is an artist, curator, organizer, teacher, anti-war activist, and Iraq war veteran. You work collaboratively in diverse spaces and media to create meaning out of personal and collective trauma, deconstruct and transform systems of oppression and seek liberation, working through an interdisciplinary practice rooted in drawing and printmaking. Erin develops projects that deconstruct militarism and related institution of dehumanization. These projects often utilize popular research strategies, experiment from forms of direct democracy, and operate in solidarity with people most impacted by structural violence. And that's what I've seen you do. I've seen you in, veteran spaces. I've seen you in grassroots spaces. I see you on the south side of the city doing art builds. You are really doing a lot of work. So I just want, before we jump too much into questions, is there something that I didn't cover? What are you currently doing these days? And then we'll get into some more of the history.
Oh, well, I'm really honored to be on your show, Natasha and Shauna. It's great to be here with you all and, get to connect in this way. And, it's a hustle. There's so much work to do all over the place, and I'm honored that I get to connect and be a part of it. That's really kind of how it's been, and that's taken me to a lot of different places and a lot of different spaces. But what I continuously see and learn and hear is how interconnected all the struggles are, and how important it is to build across movements and across communities to change, and how art has just always been this way for people to tell their stories and to build power collectively. So I'm honored to get to be here with you all and kind of chat a little bit about that today.
Well, we're really glad to have you. It's been awesome to. I first got to know you when you called me to do the NATO march in Chicago back in 2012. Although I think we met before then, but you were just like one of the white dudes floating around the background, veteran, whatever. So there's many of you. But when you called me to do the NATO thing, I think that's when I first met you as like an organizer with About Face back in the day. So it's been really awesome to see, how you've been of service to the movement, from organizing that march to seeing your art everywhere. And I'm just so glad that you're here with us today.
Yeah.
Well, thanks. Yeah, and it was wonderful getting to connect with you back in the day, and I think I can't remember if it was right after NATO protests, or right before that, you came out to Chicago and participated in a program with Michael Rakowitz, an amazing Iraqi American artist who had a project called Enemy Kitchen, and his whole project was about highlighting the racism underneath our ongoing conflicts and lifting up this idea of inherently who's identified as the enemy. And so he began to cook his mother's recipes from Iraq, and it was beautiful to get to connect with him and work with him. And I think that was one of the first spaces we maybe spent time together, talking and kind of collaborating.
Yeah, I remember Enemy Kitchen. That food was delicious, and it was really hot. Yeah. And I also want to show this real quick. One of our fans, Garrett, is watching with us today. Hey, Garrett, thanks for supporting us and watching and saying fuck war. We really appreciate all the work you're doing over as the ED at Veterans for Peace. So glad you're here with us.
Absolutely. Let's get into it. Erin, tell us about your anti-war movement history. What brought you to the space?
So I was deployed to Kuwait and Iraq 2003, 2004, rather kind of early on. My first mission into Iraq was May 2003. I was a truck driver, and I was a truck driver with a truck from Vietnam without plates for my flak vest and without maps. And I quickly realized just how we weren't there for the Iraqi people in any kind of way. And I was extended 3 times, and my tour ended up being 15 months. And each step of the way, I realized more and more the contradictions that I had kind of believed growing up just collapsed in the face of what I was seeing on the ground in Iraq. And I came home and I was pretty isolated. I didn't know any other Iraq veterans. I was the first Iraq veteran to return to the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. And at the time, it was really alienating. 70% of the country was supportive of the war. And what everyone was talking about and what was in the news was not reflective of my experience. And I ended up connecting with a lot of artists, and I was involved with an art show called In War, At War, that was just trying to highlight the fact that our country was at war and no one seemed to be paying attention. And during that, one of the organizers of the art show brought over a Vietnam veteran against the war member. His name was Joe Miller, and he showed a film, and he showed Sir No Sir, and it just really exposed me to this long history of anti-war organizing within the veteran community. And it also made me realize that it was on me, that as much as I was frustrated with, um, our country's lack of attention to the ongoing conflict, I actually had a lot of power as a veteran to organize and withdraw consent within the military for the ongoing war. And that film helped me realize how important it was as a veteran to get active, to get organized. And I just jumped into it. I attended a march in January 2007. I joined Iraq Veterans Against the War in the fall of 2006. January 2007, I went to a national protest. Then I went to the national headquarters. And I was like, we have to have a Chicago chapter. I want to get active and get organized. And I went back from that and helped form the Chicago chapter, and been active organizing ever since. I think veterans have a really important, unique role in not just anti-war organizing, but in the longer history of social justice movements. And I'm honored to like kind of connect with that lineage and that history.
What made you turn to art? Again, I've seen you in, I can name the spaces, but I mean, it goes back to the Poor People's Campaign, not just what the work I saw you doing in Chicago, but at the national level. You're at the Art Center, engaging with young folks. I see you, the Just Seeds work that you're doing. I know you throw down with Dissenters, which is, a youth-led collective that's anti-war in this space that is doing just amazing work. So I'm curious, like, what made you turn to art, and then the extension of that. You just brought up like your role in the grassroots and really understanding the lineage of art. I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about that arc.
Yeah, I didn't when I was deployed, I didn't know anything. I turned 21 and 22 on my deployment, and I didn't know anything about organizing, activism, anti-war work. And I was just destroyed, full of contradictions in the middle of my deployment. But I knew that Picasso painted this painting called Guernica that was critical of the Spanish, of the Franco regime during the Spanish Civil War, and the bombings of Guernica. And I realized that art had this really important role to dissent against the violence. And on a fundamental level, I realized I didn't want to be a part of something destructive anymore. I wanted to be a part of something creative. And that just put me down this direction of art. And when I got back from the war, I traveled through Europe, and I went to all these, the Louvre and all the big art museums I'd always heard about. And I thought that's like, how I was to become an artist was to study all this art history. And while I was over there, I realized that there is this a massive lineage of artists making work critical of war. It's not as present in the US context. And when I got back from that, I realized and began to get active in the art community. I realized that where that shows up maybe not isn't in the mainstream art community, but it's in the activist art community. And there's a long lineage of anti-war activist art that has been pushing back against militarism and against other forms of systemic violence, and just connecting into that history and learning from it, and then trying to build alongside it. And that kind of is what brought me to the art. And I've seen how it's a survival tool. It's how communities tell their stories. It's how communities maintain stories in the absence of institutional power. how outside of these institutions that often are oppressive and violent, how do we maintain our community stories of struggle and survival? And again and again, the arts are how people have maintained those stories and inspired each other. And most recently, I've been spending a ton of time talking to torture survivors from the Chicago Police Department and torture survivors from Guantanamo. And in both cases, they've spoken about how art was a tool of survival. It was a way for them to maintain their humanity and assert their humanity in a dehumanizing institution and in dehumanizing situations. And whether that's the mass incarceration system here in the US, or that's our foreign policy and who's targeted by that, people continue to resist in the most dehumanizing of spaces just with that creative gesture. I mean, the idea of being in a cell in Guantanamo and having absolutely nothing, yet the will to create, and that will being a threat to the institution because the institution can't accept the idea of a human expression because it's designed to dehumanize. And that will to create becomes this gesture of resistance that just crumbles the systems everything is based upon. And so to me, like, art is this transformative power that people continually go back to, and I'm just honored to be in dialogue with it and help bring those stories out into the world and be a part of those stories and learn from them. So that's what's turned me to art, I guess. Long-winded answer.
No, I mean that's so great. It makes me think about the first action I did with About Face was Operation Recovery and that portfolio, because I was in Omaha, Nebraska, right? The biggest military installation nearby is off at Air Force Base. It's a super red area. Like, you can't really be anti-war in Omaha, Nebraska back in 2010 or, whenever it was. And I got the Operation Recovery portfolio and put that up in a little cafe and organized veteran poets. And I had hundreds and hundreds of people come to that event that I think I would not have had if I didn't have, like, here is veteran art. Hear what veterans, how they feel about war, and really awakening people to, like what you were saying before, like, yeah, we are actively in a war. It's being privatized and switched over to drones, and the ways that the quote boots on the ground are being masked. There are still people there, and there are still people getting bombed and people getting hurt. And it's a very hard message to strike up at the grocery store, right? But if somebody sees, like, art talking about these issues, representing these issues in a meaningful way, I think the conversation totally changes. So thanks for organizing that portfolio back in the day.
Yeah, the War is Trauma portfolio. It came out of a street action. We did Just Seeds held its national retreat here in Chicago, and they reached out to Iraq Veterans Against the War and asked if there was anything that they could do. And I was like, let's do some wheat pasting and do a little street art campaign to raise the issues of military sexual trauma, traumatic brain injury, and post-traumatic stress disorder, and war resistors. Because people just didn't know. At that time, PTSD was not in the discourse, and neither were TBI or MST and war resistors. People didn't know that there was thousands and thousands of people refusing to deploy, some of them going to Canada, many of them going AWOL. And we wanted to bring that out to the public. And so we did a street art campaign, and a bunch of those graphics then turned into a portfolio. We reached out to a bunch of veterans to contribute. And the specific messaging all came from Just Seeds and the voices of these veterans and war resistors. I think about Susan Swift, who has this extremely crazy, powerful story of resisting deployment with people that assaulted her, and going to jail instead of deploying with them, and speaking out about the history of sexual trauma in the military. And Rodney Ewing, who's still up in Canada to this day, he's still up there, and just being able to bring their voices and their stories out, and then have these portfolios that then we could ship out to members across the country to host art shows and to bring out the community and talk about these issues to get people engaged. And art is often, sometimes it can be an easier step for people to take to engage with art, and it can create space for people to contribute to the conversation, as opposed to it being just a one-sided conversation, which always ends up making things rich when you can get into a dialogue and dive into how complex these issues are. And so that portfolio became a model for many other portfolios, up to the one we just did with the dissenters, called Demilitarize. And that portfolio was all the messaging came from the dissenters, from this BIPOC youth anti-war organization, and their vision of what anti-war means, what demilitarization means, what reclaiming their resources means. And then artists responded to that, and now they have this portfolio that's been used on social media, but then also in the streets. And it's up right now. It's in the multiple galleries in different parts of the country. And so art has this way of engaging in different spaces and places that perhaps we can't always get to within social media, or even just within our own organizing.
Yeah, right on. What projects are you working on now?
Well, I'm really active with Just Seeds, and we are always collaborating with different social justice grassroots organizations. We just did a big project here in Chicago, lifting up the General Irons victory, which was a group of Southsiders who protested and demonstrated, and actually went on a hunger strike to prevent a aluminum recycling plant from coming to their community, from a white community to an overwhelmingly Black and brown community. It was clearly environmental racism that was happening. And these individuals in the community, they rose up, they stood up, they spoke out, and they shut it down and actually prevented it from happening. And so celebrating their victory, we don't hear about these stories enough, these stories of people's power to actually change the situation. And so that's an example. And I have I'm help curate a show with Amber Ginsberg. That's an exhibition at the DePaul Art Museum called Remaking the Exceptional: Tea, Torture, and Reparations, which traces the interconnections between the police torture here in Chicago and the torture in Guantanamo and Abu Ghraib and other Black sites around the world, like the salt pits in Bagram, and how literally the same people that were involved with torture in Chicago or with the Ohio police departments were involved with torture there, and how there's this interchange between the police and military. And often we don't talk about those things in our common discourse as them being connected, but they are. And in an intimate, so many ways that I know you all are always talking about, but it's not as common in the larger discourse. And simultaneously, how the movements are connected, how the movements for justice, the movements for reparations are connected. What is it? Chicago is the only city in the country to provide reparations for racially motivated police violence, police torture. And what does it mean to expand reparations? What does it mean to learn a craft of acknowledgement and apology and accountability for structural and institutional violence? How do we start, especially as white people in this country, how do we start working on taking accountability for our role as people, as Americans? How do we take role for responsibility for our foreign policy and the impact it's had across generations in so many countries? So that's a big part of that project. And I'm also working with the Prison Neighborhood Arts Education Project. I've been teaching at Stateville Prison for about 6 years now. And we're doing murals by artists at Stateville. Spent the last year and a half designing murals, and we continuously try and get those murals out into the streets with the idea that, the individuals inside the carceral systems are the ones that have the solution to changing and to decarcerating our society. So And that's a big part of the work and connecting, militarism and the security state and the carceral state. How are those things intimately connected? How is it local and global? And just kind of tying into that lineage that really connects movements across communities as well.
Yeah, right on. Thanks, Erin. That's a lot of great work. I'm curious, what are you most proud of in all the work that you are doing or have done? I don't. Yeah, curious to hear your
That's
thoughts.
that's a tough question. Most proud of. Um, to be honest, I'm most proud of my daughter. I have a daughter. She's 2 years old, and um, every time I look at her, I can't believe she's my daughter. And she's just so amazing. Um, but I'm just, I'm just humbled. I feel like I've been really lucky to get to work with so many amazing, powerful movement leaders and elders, and learn from them. And I've really appreciated that people have opened their door to me, and I just hope that I can do the same, and you know, help keep the intergenerational struggle going, because it is an intergenerational struggle that we're building. So, what does it mean to demilitarize this country in a systemic and structural way? And I think that means, a question that is an intergenerational question is about reimagining what this country is. And, is it even possible when the country is rooted in colonial structure? So these are like profound questions that we have to grapple with. And I think art creates space to dive into things that we don't have answers for or language for. The traumas the intergenerational traumas that so many people hold, and create meaning out of it, which I hope can be a different thing than what we currently are living in.
Yeah, your daughter is beautiful. I mean, seriously.
Uh,
And to see you with her and beam with pride, but also show up for the community and be present the way you are, is why I'm just honored to know you, call you friend, and to be in these movement spaces with you. Yeah, I'm curious then, before we move to close, are there any final thoughts, for folks who are organizing in this movement, who find it difficult to make the connections that I hear you saying that you have, and in the many years, and I would say decade, that you've been doing this work? Do you have some motivation for folks who are embarking on trying to understand, um, and to help make those connections that you laid out? That art has been your vessel, but again, just some lessons, and to really just share, I think, some tangibles in terms of where people can find their place, perhaps, if that's not too big of a question to just kind of throw at you before we move to close. Love to hear your thoughts.
well, the thing that kept coming to my mind is generosity. You know, I can't help but think about when I went back to Iraq in 2009 as a civilian, as a representative of Iraq Veterans Against the War, as a representative of About Face Veterans Against the War, to the International Labor Conference in Erbil, Iraq. And, I said, the organizers, I was there just to document and, share back in the States the story of all these workers from all over Iraq that had come together to talk about the future of union organizing and worker rights within their country. and they invited a peace delegation from the U.S. and it was amazing. I heard stories I had never heard about in the U.S. Stories of electrical workers, surrounding and occupying a military base and shutting it down because it was how they got access to their power plant that they worked at and maintained. And stories that I just were kind of unbelievable stories of people maintaining women's health clinics and schools and things I just didn't hear about at all. And they asked me to speak, and I didn't feel like I had a right to say anything to anybody, but the organizers insisted. And so I went on the stage in front of 400 some workers, and I said, I was here in your country, and I pointed my weapon at your families and at your communities, and for that I'm sorry. But I'm not here for forgiveness. I'm here to take responsibility. And afterwards, I told them about the anti-war movement, about the number of people going AWOL and resisting the war, and how the American people didn't support the war. And after I finished speaking, this guy jumped up in the back of the auditorium, started yelling something in Arabic and booking down to the stage. And I thought he was going to come beat me up. And I was like, it's what I deserve. I was here in his country. I'm a part of the problem. And I thought he was just going to knock me out. And just as he came up on stage to, what I thought was punch me, instead he grabbed me and he hugged me. And I just started bawling. I started crying. And he thanked me. And I just was just like, he said, I just want to come up on stage and give this gentleman a hug, is what he said. And the generosity of that is something that is of that individual that was in the Iraqi military, the Iraqi worker, totally devastated and impacted by our occupation that I was involved in, showed me like the overwhelming generosity I need to return. And I need to show up and offer back. And I feel like that's what I have to share with other people, is that, the generosity that individuals offer us is what we have to offer back. And I think creativity and art is one way of doing that. And anybody and everybody is an artist. Everyone can make a sign. Anyone can do it. Download graphics. You can download graphics from Just Seeds. There's a whole graphics page, and make your own protest posters and signs. And I want to encourage everyone to do that. And, you can go wheat pasting. You can put your words on the streets. Everyone can do that. And so, I just want to share that, like, it's the little things and building those relationships on a local level, and building community on local level for the long haul, that is really what builds the movement. And I hope that people have that time and opportunity to do that. And I'll just plug one last thing, is check out the Remaking the Exceptional podcast at t-project.org. It's a podcast that interviews all these torture survivors, and I think their ideas about what justice is, their ideas about what reparations is, I feel like that's something that we can all learn from.
Thanks, Erin. I definitely feel like your call for people to make art as a way of resistance is really real. I know that a lot of times in veterans organizing, we would do stuff like warrior writers or visual arts, and crusty ass veterans would be like, no, I'm not putting my feelings on pieces of paper. That's stupid. That doesn't stop the war. That doesn't do anything, right? But it's just time and time again, when having the vision of where we are supposed to be, or being able to put out what is wrong visually, changes the conversation, and it changes people. And it's a really powerful form of resistance to be able to make art that interrupts the narrative that war is normal and good, or that militarization is good to, quote, protect us, right? So on that, in veterans organizing art specifically, you gave us this this link of veteranartmovement.net. I'm going to put that up. Can you talk a little bit more about this?
Yeah, so there's just a long history of you know, veterans returning.
Hey, Erin, I can't hear you.
I'm not muted.
I can hear him okay.
Oh, it's
It's okay. I was just saying that, you know, within the history of veterans returning, there's a long history of veterans returning to the arts. And, you know, a number of people that worked on the Black Panther paper were veterans. And people that were involved with AIM, American Indian Movement, were veterans and doing art with them. And just lifting up this history that is a counter narrative. And when veterans turn to art and turn to creative outlets and turn to expressive things, it challenges the dominant narrative and helps, you know, push back a little bit. And I think, you know, I hope that people can connect to that history and be inspired by it, and know that it does make change. Anytime we're confronting that dominant narrative and altering it, changing it, creating space for other stories, we're making change. And so I want to encourage people to definitely take advantage of that. And the veteran art movement is one place that work is happening. And it's just trying to connect the veteran artists that are out there so people can have a dialogue and be engaged across and push each other. Because often veterans are we're not pushed by the larger discourse. And, you know, we're encouraged to kind of fall into tropes and perpetuate nationalism or militarism in these other ways. And what does it mean to be a part of a community that's pushing each other to make better, more profound, more transformative work?
Yeah, it's so important. Listen, Erin, thank you so much for joining us. We'll drop the link to this if we haven't already in the chat. You know, for everyone who's watching us here live or will catch this live later, engage in that space. And yeah, I think we are good to move to close for today. Thank you for everyone who's on.
I hear nothing. I guess you all can hear me, but I can't hear anything. So this is odd.
We hear you just fine. But listen, Erin, thank you so much. This is has been a great conversation because I think it really does connect such a strong piece of the movement, which is art, which we see a lot of the young youth-led folks who are self-organizing themselves and using art as a way, to build power across their communities, right? And so, thank you so much for being on with us today. We'll see you soon. And for everyone who is out there, we'll be back next week. We'll do these Drop the Mic Mondays. The mic, as a reminder, is the military industrial complex. And so we'll be on each week with artists, veteran activists, scholars, friends of the community doing work and connecting, their work to this, larger, struggle for peace, self-determination, and really a transformation of power. So again, thank you everyone for joining us. Be well, take care, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you, Natasha. Thank you, Shauna.
Thank you, Erin. Peace, comrade.